We've created a global money and profit-driven structure which consists of a circular exchange protocol, if you will, where money must move from the consumer to the employer to the employee, which is the consumer again. And the only way, again, to sustain this pattern, to keep people employed, the only way to keep people eating, the only way to keep GDP up, the only way to keep the stock market up is through the mandate that goods and services comprised, again, of our finite resources and energy are constantly and perpetually used and sold ad infinitum, irregardless of purpose, utility, or respect for what we actually have. I couldn't possibly come up with a more destructive manner for organizing society.
And the sad thing is, people don't see this whatsoever. They have been conditioned into ideologies. Capitalism, communism, socialism, well, guess what? Any social ideology, specifically economic, which does not directly relate to the resources of the planet in its doctrines explicitly, meaning the attributes of our environment which actually sustain our lives, is an inapplicable and thus irrelevant social ideology. Case in point, oil and fossil fuels. We live in a hydrocarbon economy, as I'm sure you all know. Our entire economic structure, meaning production, distribution, food cultivation, transportation, etc., is entirely based on energy from fossil fuels. There are 10 calories of hydrocarbon energy in every 1 calorie of food currently consumed in the industrialized world. This is M. King Hubbert, a geologist and, interestingly enough, a technocrat. M. King Hubbert predicted in the late 1940s that the United States would peak in its oil production in 1970. Of course, he was ridiculed, laughed at, and scorned by the scientific establishment. And unfortunately, he was right. The U.S. did peak in the 1970s. In fact, some studies now show that global oil discoveries have likely peaked around the same time. The exact date is debatable, but it doesn't change anything. Now, before I go any further, I know some of you out there are saying, how do we know that these statistics are accurate? How do we know that the research institutions are unaware of existing oil supplies that go undiscovered? And how do we know if the oil corporations themselves, which contain the data, are not lying to simply boost their profits? Well, these are good questions, but there is no question about the decline in the United States. We do import over 70% of our oil now. And as far as the global peak, all you really have to do is look at the drilling patterns of the major corporations to see that almost every major oil company is desperate to find new oil reserves, and they have gone almost everywhere legally possible to do so.
The oil on this planet, which took 100 million years to generate, regardless of what you believe about depletion rates, is going to run out one way or another. It is an unsustainable practice. And I won't even go into the obvious dangers associated with burning fossil fuels in regards to its environmental effects, which we're all hearing about today. As an aside, it is not at all irrational or hasty to consider that the peak oil issue just might have something to do with the fact that the United States, which consumes 25% of the world's energy while having only 5% of the population, has the largest permanent military bases in history situated in the Middle East with no evidence whatsoever of ever leaving this region.
Obama has already stated that he is going to leave 50,000 troops in the Middle East indefinitely. This is the guy that got the Nobel Peace Prize. As we continue in the Middle East to probe and agitate countries which contain, guess what, the majority of the remaining recoverable oil on this planet, such as Iran.
Give it some thought. Now, if you take for a moment to consider that peak oil and its relationship to the economic system and geopolitics might be relevant to the U.S. involvement in the Middle East, you'll tend to find the world starts to make a lot more sense. In the words of M. King Hubbert, we are in a crisis in the evolution of human society. It's unique to both human and geological history. It has never happened before, and it can't possibly happen again. You can only use oil once.
Soon, all the oil is going to be burned and all the metals mined and scattered.
This is obviously a scenario of catastrophe, but we have the technology. All we have to do is completely overhaul our culture and find an alternative to money. We are not starting from zero. We have an enormous amount of existing technical knowledge. Just a matter of putting it all together. A non-catastrophic solution is impossible unless the society is made stable. This means abandoning two axioms of our culture, the current work ethic and the idea that growth is a normal state of life. He continues in a paper he wrote in 1981 called Two Intellectual Systems, Matter, Energy, and the Monetary Culture. Hubbard writes, the world's present industrial civilization is handicapped by the coexistence of two universal, overlapping, and incompatible intellectual systems. The accumulated knowledge of the last 4 centuries of the properties and interrelationships of matter and energy, and the associated monetary culture which has evolved from folkways of prehistoric origin. You simply cannot have a society operate based on this necessity for constant growth to maintain, ironically, stability.
We have at our disposal a tremendous number of alternative energies
And infrastructure possibilities,
and sophisticated manners of implementation
which could reduce our reliance on fossil fuels dramatically, paving the way to a world that would have zero reliance on hydrocarbon energies at all. Unfortunately, you are not going to see this anytime soon, for the economic paradigm we live in sets up another serious problem that we need to address, and I simply call this establishment paralysis. Given our tremendous reliance on hydrocarbon energy at this stage of human evolution, people, when hearing about the obvious problem of depletion, naively brush it off under the assumption that the establishment is actually preparing for a transition out of our dependency on hydrocarbons. Or better yet, that the establishment can actually afford to create a transition. In order to understand the difficulty of moving out of our current established energy paradigm, we must first realize that from a financial standpoint, there is very little motivation to move into a new system. This is the very nature of an established institution in the monetary system. The fact of the matter is, an exorbitant amount of money, I know this will sound strange to many of you, an exorbitant amount of money is going to be made on the scarcity of energy and, in fact, the collapse of society itself. Our economic system is predicated on making money on the way up and making money on the way down. Those in power, referencing back to that Citigroup document I talked about, have a propensity to care more about the short-term, short-sighted financial benefits of running out of energy than they care about the pivotal life-supporting attributes that it provides. If you look back at history, you see that the concern over depleting fossil fuels has been talked about for a long time. And many scientists in the 1960s and 70s felt that by the year 2000, we would have an entirely different energy infrastructure. Why didn't that happen? Why is it that the Reagan administration ripped off the solar panels from the White House that Jimmy Carter had installed? Why is it the U.S. government sided with big oil so the electric car would be squashed in the United States? The answer, of course, is that our profit-based system sets up a natural defensive propensity to stop anything if those changes find the prior establishment to be obsolete. This is likely the most caustic attribute of our current situation, the knee-jerk propensity to stop productive change for the sake of preserving market share and profit for select groups. Think about it. If you start a company, you hire employees, you generate income. What have you done? You've created an institution which yourself and your coworkers rely on for their income and hence survival. Therefore, you will do what you need to protect yourself and your life-sustaining company. It is providing for your standard of living. In other words, there is a built-in short-sightedness. And this survival element, which is only operational in our current profit-oriented system, is what is stopping needed change from coming to pass. I could probably ramble off many examples of new advents that have been pushed to the side because they're either too efficient or too sustainable for the market system to absorb, or simply money can't be made continually off of them. It can't perpetuate the system, or it puts an industry out of work. It puts people out of work. There is a human element to this, so there's a natural need, a natural attribute, where people say, well, okay, this is probably better for society, but I need to make money now. I can't think about the transition, so let's just push this aside for now. That's what's happening over and over and over and over again. It's not that they're bad people or anything like that. This is what the system has created. Simultaneously, let's remember that the market system requires constant problems. In order for the public interest in consumption to be maintained, problems and cultural influence is required. The more problems there are, the better the economy, generally speaking. In this system, it is inherently good for cars to break down. It is good for people to get cancer. It is good for computers to become quickly obsolete. Why? More money. To put it into a sentence, change, abundance, sustainability, and efficiency
are the enemies of the profit structure. Progressive advancements
in science and technology, which can resolve problems of inefficiency and scarcity once and for all,
are, in effect, making the prior establishment's servicing of those problems obsolete.